Gentlemen, thank you for your patience. My name is Sinethemba Mthethwa. I am in the Urban Systems Unit at ICLEI Africa, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Resilient Food System Workshop. Before we begin, I would like to remind you all of the workshop protocols. So the workshop is being recorded, and therefore by participating in the workshop, you are consenting to be recorded. We welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat box by giving your name and the country in which you are joining us from. We also welcome active participation in the chat box throughout the workshop. Please add your country name next to your name by clicking the rename option next to your name. To hear the session in English, please click on the interpretation tab at the bottom of your screen and select English. On the agenda today, we have working session 1, where we will be co-creating a food systems resilience definition, and that will take place here in the main room. We also have working session 2, where we will identify priority food systems resilience indicators, and there we will split into much smaller groups and have our discussion in breakout rooms. We'll then have a leg stretch, we'll report back to plenary, and then we will give closing reflections and a way forward. Before we get started, I would like to invite Tom from Conservation International to offer introductory remarks. Tom, I will give the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hope you can hear me speaking, right?
Yes, you're clear, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for
Tom,
the invitation.
if you are speaking, you are not audible.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm not sure whether I'm audible now.
Snare, I think you need to change to the English channel. Tom is audible.
Yeah, okay. So thank you so much for inviting me to this occasion. I think it is an important event because we're trying to look into resilient food systems and how countries have been able to do their baseline, for instance, and also the progress that they have been able to make throughout the 5 years project. And I think this is an opportunity for us to come together, try to look at things that we did differently, and of course, how best we did them, so that the lessons that are learned here can be used and inform the funders like JF and GCF to ensure that future projects that are tied to food security or even other projects are able to get lessons from this program. And I would like to first encourage countries. We are aware that some countries have already closed their projects. For instance, Ethiopia, also Nigeria, they are finishing their project. And I'd like to encourage that they should take part in this and also try to share those lessons. There's one thing that there's the other thing that I'd like to share, and this is with regards to supporting the ICLEI and also CI so that we are able to finish this project on time, and of course to generate some of the outputs that will we intend. And I will highly encourage countries to share data, specifically the baseline information data that they were able to collect, and also for those countries that have already completed their program, the end of the project, like data sets that they have. That will be very critical in helping the consultant and CI to come up with a study that shows all these things. So just so that I don't take a lot of time, I think I'll end there and I'll be listening in, and of course support the consultant and countries wherever they need my support. Thank you.
Thank you for Thank you for the introductory remarks, Tom. Before we get started, I would like to give a brief introduction of ICLEI Africa and our work. So ICLEI Africa is a global network working with more than 2,500 local and regional governments committed to sustainable urban development. We drive sustainable urban development through 5 key thematic areas, which are a low emission development pathway, the nature-based development pathway, circular development pathway, resilient development pathway, and equitable and people-centered development pathway. Because of our work, this places us in a good position to undertake the resilience assessments across the 12 countries in Africa. So our team was appointed to monitor and assess the respective and collective resilient food systems projects in terms of resilience. And the objectives for this project were or are to assess the quality and usefulness of the data collected at country level, to validate the indicators used in measuring resilience, to identify the prospectus and further support needs for the resilient food system worldwide country projects. Also to assess the contributions of the country projects to improving resilience of food security in their program areas, and of the overall contributions of the resilient food system project as a whole, and also to unpack lessons learned. For this workshop, the objectives are to co-define resilient food systems and also to identify desired outcomes and indicators for assessing food systems resilience. I would now like to hand over to the project lead, Fru Wanka, who is going to take us through defining food systems. Thank you.
Thanks, Senior. Hello, everyone. I'm Fru Wanka from ICLEI Africa. Now, before we start the discussion on the definition for resilient food system, I would like to start by providing a summary of a food system. So when we talk about food system, a food system comprises of all elements and activities that relate to food production, transportation, processing, distribution, consumption, as well as resource and waste recovery. Now, there are 3 main outcomes that a well-functioning food system is expected to deliver. And these outcomes include food and nutrition security, environmental sustainability, and livelihood. Now, for a food system to deliver these outcomes, there are different drivers that interlink and impact on the food system. And these drivers have been grouped in 6 different categories. And these categories include biophysical and environmental drivers, technology, innovation, and infrastructure, economic and market drivers, political and institutional drivers, sociocultural drivers, and demographic drivers. We can see now that globally and Africa in particular, the food system is becoming increasingly vulnerable to internal and external drivers ranging from sudden shocks to long-term stressors. Now, these have an impact on the food system, and this can be seen in terms of the food security situation in Africa. If we compare the food security situation in Africa and other regions in the world, we will realize that the rate at which the number of food insecure people is increasing in Africa, it's increasing at a faster rate compared to other regions in the world. Now, this has triggered policymakers and also organizations that are involved in activities that impact on the food system to seek ways that can help to build resilience within the food system. And a clear example is this Resilient Food Project that was implemented by the Conservation International in the 12 different sub-Saharan countries that are faced with environmental degradation, loss of ecosystem, and also low crop and livestock productivity. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Lauren, who is going to take us through with co-defining resilient food systems.
Thanks, Fru. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Aronsa. I'm also with the food team at ICLEI Africa. So before we get started, if you can go to the next slide, please, Fru. I just wanted to gauge how people are thinking about food system resilience. So if everyone could please open your chat, and in the chat write one word or a sentence that comes to mind when you think about food system resilience. And don't send it yet, don't press enter. I'm going to give everyone about a minute to write down this word or sentence, and then I will count down before you can send, and we will have an array of what people are thinking about in terms of food system resilience. Okay, I hope everybody is ready. So I'm going to count down now. So 3, 2, 1, and send. So some of the responses that people have kindly shared with us is a system that will return in existence after a shock, very adaptable, bouncing back after vulnerability, absorb, to withstand shocking availability, access, adaptation. So as you can hear, there are a lot of very similar words around absorbing shocks, being able to adapt, being able to cope. And you will see in a moment, these are some of the key words that were coming out of the definitions that the countries here have shared with us. So if we go to the next slide, please, Rue. So we had about 8 responses to the survey that we sent out a few weeks ago, and thank you to those countries who did reply. And here we're just going to focus on some of the responses that we got around the definition of resilient food systems. I'm going to read the highlighted versions in English, but it is on the screen in French as well. So some of the key points that we pulled out were react to disaster and crisis in a timely and efficient manner that's also sustainable, which is actually from the FAO definition. Then things like minimized its vulnerabilities, that's in terms of the food system, and then achieve the food production resilience in areas or landscapes that are under pressure. Then an idea of having more or less capacity in order to cope, as we've seen in some of the comments, to climate shock, or to be able to produce as if it's a normal situation. Next. And then some things were brought to light around, again, producing enough to meet nutrition and income requirements. Again, some reflection on bouncing back or being able to return to effective service. And this idea of working together to drive sufficient and safe food for all people in the populations, which I think is slightly different, but also a very important narrative that has been carried through. And then finally, increasing food production and reversing land degradation. So that's like maybe more specific to that country, but still related to food system resilience. So what our team did was look at some of these definitions, and as well as some desktop research around what Fru was talking about, and try to summarize a preliminary definition of food system resilience. And so our definition looks like this in the green box, which is food system resilience as the capacity of food systems to deliver desired outcomes sustainably in the face of shocks and stresses. And then I just want to mention here that the idea of a desired outcome, and I've given some examples just further down in the slide, are things like access to quantity and quality foods, having sufficient availability of resources for food systems, having access to basic services, having the ability to cope and recover from shocks, and among others. So just noting here that we will unpack this desired outcomes and what we hope to achieve in food system resilience in the second part of today's session. But basically at this point, I'm going to let you have a few moments to like think about this definition. And Fru, if you click next, there's one more block on this page. And then at this point, we kind of want to like open the floor, either by raising your hand or writing in the chat box. In terms of this definition, are there either key words or key ideas that you think we've missed? Do you think this succinctly covers your experience of food system resilience in your specific country project? Is there something that you would like to see that's not here? So covering those two questions, do you think anything is missing? And do you have any comments around this initial definition? So there's an opportunity now to share with us your thoughts, as well as post this session to come back to us with any things that might come to mind later on. So just in terms of what people commented earlier, there was a lot around adaptation and adaptable and absorbing and withstanding, and we hope that sort of is covered correctly in this definition towards the end in terms of sustainably in face of shocks and stresses. I see there's a hand from someone. Sorry. Good day, Barara. How are you?
How are you? Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
This is Birara from Ethiopia, and thank you for your presentations and summary of different ideas, different definitions from different perspectives. But I saw your definition, summary of definition, food systems resilience as capacity of food systems to deliver desired outcomes. In resilience of food systems, there are two important words I understand. There are, the one is the resilience and the other is food systems. There are two keywords, you know. You have already defined in terms of addressing the resilience towards food systems. But in many, I understand in many perspectives, food systems by itself, it has to be defined very well. What do you mean when we say food systems? So we have to include at least the key important points that have to be addressed in addressing the resilience of food systems. Food systems by itself, it's very big idea, so that many of the countries, many of the people are missing the key components in food systems. So I want to raise this issue or to come to the point, and at least it has to incorporate the food systems as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bara.
Yeah, did you get my point? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. You make a very good point, because I do know, I think there is some consensus around what a food system is, but I think it is important for us to note that it's not only at the production stage, but also along other points in the food value chain, and somehow incorporating that in the decision, I mean, in the definition, sorry. Are there any other questions or comments or thoughts to share with us? Okay, if there aren't any for now, we can also come back to this towards the end of the session. Thanks, Tom. I see your comment about a footnote on stresses and shocks. So yeah, maybe if something comes to mind throughout the session today, just let one of the ICLEI Africa members know, and we can add your comment or contribution. So moving on to this sort of next part, we'll be diving into more of the desired outcomes. Can we go to the next slide? Sorry, next one. So part of this work is kind of to determine if an intervention, so your project and future projects around food system resilience, has helped or will help build resilience in the food system, as we need to assess the food system based on what we are calling desired outcomes and their associated indicators. And these two aspects are used to then measure the progress towards resilience. So this part of the workshop, we will look at assessing what we've pulled together already and expanding the desired outcomes and preliminary indicators. So just below, there's an image of what it looks like, but we'll go into those details in the next couple of slides. You next. Okay, so far, just touching back on what Fru mentioned and Sneh, that the overall project objective here is on building resilience to food security. And therefore, we've we decided to try to use the lens of food security to group the indicators based on the 6 food security pillars, which are availability, access, utilization, stability, agency, and sustainability. And then under each of these 6 pillars, we've put together 3 to 6 desired outcomes, which we will show you in a little bit. And linked to each desired outcome, there are a list of preliminary indicators. And it's worth noting here, this work was done based on the project reports and the data that have been shared with our team and Conservation International in the last few months, trying to pull out a holistic set of indicators looking at food system resilience. Your next slide. So we will work together on a mural, which will look a little bit like this. I know we can't read it at the moment, but we will be able to read it once on the mural. So we've divided, as I said, under the 6 pillars. So you'll see on the far left, there's accessibility, and then just below that, availability. And in the purple blocks are the desired outcomes, and just next to that, the suggested indicators, both in English and in French. If you're next. So just to come back to this, so during this session, we will break into 2 groups, and each group will spend about 2 minutes under each pillar. And in that, we will discuss the desired outcomes and the preliminary indicators, answering these 2 questions shown on screen. So looking at the food security pillars in terms of your project or the definition of resilient food systems, 1, do you agree with the desired outcomes and preliminary indicators suggested? And 2, are there anything missing? Is there anything missing? Great. So before we split into groups, if you can go to the next slide through. Yes, Tom, your hand is raised.
Yeah, there's a question from one of our colleagues. She's asking the definition of urgency. And my thinking will be that before they go into groups, you just give like a brief definition of
sure, I can do that.
Those 6 pillars. Yeah.
Sure, no problem. The definitions are also on the mural. So if if you will stop sharing, I can share the mural and then I can go through the definitions. Cool, thank you. And also, if Snare and Fru, you can share the link to the mural salon. So as I mentioned, there are 6 pillars, and if you zoom in, you'll be able to see. So in terms of accessibility, we're talking about sufficient physical and economical access to food. In terms of availability, we're talking about food supplied through domestic production or imports. In terms of utilization, we're talking about adequate diet, clean water, and sanitation and healthcare. In terms of stability, we're talking about your food secured during sudden shocks or cyclical events. And then there's a point of vulnerability here. in terms of losing food, access and availability. And then sustainability talks about the long-term capacity of food systems to provide food security and nutrition without compromising the social, economic, and environmental bases that generate food security and nutrition for future generations. And then finally, agency is about having the autonomy of the food system. And if that's a bit vague, you'll have a look and see that there are these, I think there's 6 here, and a lot of it's about your having choice of what you eat and when you eat, having a voice in local food systems, networks and governance and policy as an individual or a community. So those are like the 2 key ideas in agency, but we will unpack those in the individual groups. And then just to note, the French ones are a little bit to the right, and you can zoom in and out to be able to read what is in the blocks. So if everyone could use the link in the chat that Sneh sent to join the mural. So if you click on the link, you don't have to see my shared screen because you'll be able to see the mural for yourself. So how this mural works and how we will work in groups is we will go through each pillar. We can cover the definition again and then talk about the desired outcomes. And if the groups think there's anything missing, you can use the other color square block to add any additional desired outcomes that you may think is missing. And then additionally, there are these round sticky notes, which you can use to add additional comments or changes or amendments that you think needs to happen to what is on the board. If you need additional sticky notes, the best way to do that is to double click. And then it adds the note for you, and then just change the color away from purple. It doesn't matter which color you use. This way we know that it's an additional comment on top of what was already existing on the board. I can't see if there are any hands or anything like that, but if anyone has any questions or needs help accessing the board, please let us know. We'll give it another 3 minutes for everyone to get onto the board before we split the team here into 2 groups. I see 4 people on the mural board, and there are about 10 of us who are in the room. So please, if you could join the mural, that would be the most useful for us. And then briefly, while people are still joining, I just want to remind those who are French speaking, if you can indicate so that we can put you in the group with the translators. But if you do end up in a group where there aren't translators, just let myself know and we can put you back in the main room. Great. My team, Fru and Ivan, will take over in the main room, and I will join the breakout room now.
Welcome back, everyone, and hope we enjoyed the exercise we did in the breakout room. I'm going to invite Sine to please give us a summary of the exercise that was done in the breakout room she was in.
Thank you, Fru. I will just quickly share my screen so that it is visible to everyone. So we do have a few additional desired outcomes and indicators. So I will start off with the accessibility pillar. So in addition to what we had when we started the workshop, participants noted that to improve accessibility or achieve this desired outcome, food systems need to contribute to economic development. Also, there needs to be access to productive resources for both men and women, support marginalized actors in the food system. So this is low-income households, your informal traders, as well as your agribusinesses. Also, is the improved access to off-farm employment or economic generating activities that supports access to food through the markets. So how would we measure this? The indicators would be, or there's a need to ensure that the number of men and women that have access to land for production increases, and also would look at the number of men and women that have control over the food that they have produced, and also we would look at the number of men or women that have access to seed and equipment necessary for production of their own food. We then moved to availability, and in addition to the desired outcomes that we came into the workshop with, one of the desired outcomes is a well-established food distribution system and enabling environments in food trade, localized or territorial supply chains, and then also utilizing drought-tolerant crops and climate-smart agriculture. So how then would we ensure an enabling environment for trade in food? We will ensure that the percentage of imported food can meet the shortage from imports. And then also would ensure that there's enough water, seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, electricity, etc. across the food value chain. Underutilization was access to clean energy for cooking, reduced malnutrition, reduced child stunting, and efficient municipal service delivery. So the indicators would then be prevalence of health issues related to unsafe cooking. So that would be the indicator for the access to clean energy for cooking outcome. For the stability pillar, desired outcomes include reduced post-harvest losses of food, reduced number of households facing hunger after a shock, sustained production, both dry and wet seasons, increased breeds of animals and crops, varieties that tolerate or are drought resistant. So the indicators of reduced post-harvest losses include number of kilograms of produce harvested, number of kilograms of products available for household consumption, number of post-harvest handling technologies available to the household to use. Also, we have the number of breeds of animals that are tolerant to droughts and that are available to the community, the number of drought-resistant crop varieties used by the community, and also the number of crop that are tolerant to flooding and available for farmers. We then also looked at the sustainability pillar, and the desired outcomes included empower small-scale farmers, promotion of sustainable agriculture practices, as well as increase environmental health through land degradation, neutrality, and carbon neutrality. So the indicators for that include seasonal soil quality, the percentage of sustainably produced food, percentage of disaster cost of disasters, 9 now and a few years ago. And then finally, we have agency. And some of the desired outcomes for that pillar include indigenous knowledge on sustaining production of food promoted. Both men and women are involved in maintaining staple food varieties, national investment in storage, of important food and animal breeds. So the indicators for that pillar include number of gene banks established, number of breeds of animals whose maintenance is a shared responsibility between men and women, methods of documenting and disseminating indigenous knowledge, and also an integration of local knowledge in policies and strategies. Those are the desired outcomes and indicators that we put together in our breakout room. If there are any other additions, I will welcome colleagues on the call to add them in the chat, and we will transcribe them on the mural. Over to you, Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks, Nate. I'm just going to share my screen quick. So in our group, zoom out of it, we discussed a number of things across the different pillars. And then some of the key ones that are kind of worth highlighting around accessibility was access to good markets and access to transportation. So that's not just the production side, but also moving of the food and selling of the food. Which then also gives you, in turn, like back to the access of the financial access. There was a note here that there were some comments around including more livestock desired outcomes or livestock orientated ones. So looking at some of the indicators, which is like how much land is available for livestock and pastures around that, as well as indicators around distance to market and measures of transport access. In terms of availability, we talked about here land available for livestock. We also talked about in terms of the storage capacity, both quality of storage and quantity of storage. And then the third one, which was interesting, was the technical knowledge of producers. So we are limited by the volumes that we can produce and the types of products that we can produce based on the technical knowledge of producers and whether they are capacitated to be able to make these effective systems. So those are linked to kind of how much storage, is there enough storage, are we producing the right kinds of food for our vegetation or landscape, are we using the best methods, and training and capacity around that. In terms of utilization, so we talked a little bit about cultural preference, and an interesting point around sometimes food is plentiful, but people don't want to eat it because that's not their first choice. So for example, there was an example around bananas and maize, and in some areas bananas are a staple, in some areas maize are a staple, but those plants could also grow in volume in other areas as well, and then they don't get used or don't get eaten because they're not the food of choice or preference. So linking utilization to cultural and local preferences, I think, is important. In terms of stability, so we didn't talk too much about adding more desired outcomes. We talked more about some ways in which to manage or deal with shocks. So some nuances around the availability of assets. So whether you have extra livestock or extra land and the ability to like sell that, sell machinery in order to get food, as a potential way to combat or survive in a shock. In terms of sustainability, so we had quite a long conversation about again, capacity and knowledge and skills in terms of at the production level, farmers having both access to the knowledge and having the knowledge to either change their crops, change their machinery for production based on different, like if there's going to be more floods or if there's going to be more droughts or other climate related issues. And then also linked to that, the big question of like conservation and preservation of food. So food being available in volume in certain times of the year, but there not being enough demand for it. So how to make your food last longer so that you can manage the supply and demand, as well as preserve so that you can still be selling your product for many months after it's been produced. And then linked to that is the literacy and the general literacy of productive families or productive companies or producers. So understanding the need to understand in order to be able to be sustainable, you need to have like a basic level of literacy to understand the dynamics between the climate and the production side of food and how those interlink. So either looking at ways in which to make trainings or capacity development available at the local literacy level and in the local language, or looking at like upskilling and training of local farmers so that they have access to the information in a way that they understand. And then finally, linked to agency, we mostly talked about how information is communicated. So there was agreement with the fact that agencies around people having the choice, and then also people having the voice in policy creation and food production and the food system in general. And then the question of like how information is communicated, and does it get to the right levels and in the right form. So back to capacity development and knowledge and literacy. Cool. Those are the main things that I wanted to point out from our discussion.
Thanks, Lauren and Sine, for that. May I please call on the floor for any comments or your thoughts or questions? And while we do that, may I please ask that in the chat box, we please indicate the country we are representing. Any comments, your thoughts or questions with the feedbacks from the different rooms? If there are no additional comments or questions, I would like to say thank you all for participating and for your contribution. We will review and synthesize this discussion from today. And then as a way forward, we are going to validate the indicators that were used in your respective projects, as well as the data. So we are going to also assess the data gaps in the different country projects and report back to the project representatives. And then also for the countries that have not completed the online survey, we will appreciate it if you can do so. And also for the countries that have not also sent in their recent documents in terms of the report or data available, please, we appreciate it if you can do that so as to speed up the assessment process we are doing. And then in terms of the exercise we just did, we will share this exercise with the various project teams for input, as some representatives were complaining about their internet connection. So once more, thank you so much for your contribution. And if you have any further questions, I'm going to put up the email for you to share. So once more, Lauren, do you have any other further comments for them?
I just sent you all a message about your country. Please could you confirm which ones you're representing before you leave? Thank you.
So we have come to the end of this workshop. Thank you for your participation and hope to see you when next we call. Thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah, bye.